To enjoy this episode ad-free, please visit patreon.com/forensictales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
In January 2013, 17-year-old Georgia high school student Kendrick Johnson didn't return home from school. As 8 o'clock became 9 o'clock and then 10 o'clock, his parents knew something wasn't right. Shortly before midnight, they reported their son missing. The following morning, they learned Kendrick had missed his 4th and 5th period classes the day before, something completely out of character for him. Then, nearly 21 hours after Kendrick was last seen, a group of students made a horrifying discovery inside the school gym. A discovery that would ignite years of investigations, conflicting autopsies, and allegations of a cover-up, and leave one question still fiercely debated today. What really happened to Kendrick Johnson? This is Forensic Tales, the suspicious death of Kendrick Johnson. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell. Today, we're opening the Forensic Tales vault and revisiting one of the most controversial cases we've ever covered, the suspicious death of Kendrick Johnson. This episode originally aired all the way back as episode 44. And because so much time has passed, and because the case continues to generate questions and debate, I felt it deserved more than a simple re-release. I've completely reworked and re-recorded the episode with updated information, improved narration, and a closer look at the forensic evidence at the center of this case. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast that explores real cases through the lens of forensic science. If you enjoy deep dives into the evidence and the science used to uncover the truth, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. For even more content, including monthly full-length bonus episodes and early ad-free access to more than 300 episodes, you can join our community on Patreon. Your support there genuinely helps keep this independent podcast going. To learn more, visit patreon.com/forensictales. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It only takes a moment, but it makes a huge difference in helping new listeners find Forensic Tales. Now let's open the vault and revisit the case of Kendrick Johnson. At the start of 2013, Kendrick Johnson was a 17-year-old student at Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia. His family described him as sweet, quiet, and sometimes a little shy. But he came alive through sports. He was a 3-sport athlete who dreamed of someday playing professional football. On January 10th, 2013, just days after students returned from winter break, Kendrick didn't come home from school. His mother, Jackie, thought he had stayed after school to watch a basketball game on campus. But as 7 o'clock became 8 o'clock and then 9 o'clock with no sign of him, she began to worry. Kendrick wasn't the kind of teenager who would stay out without telling his parents where he was. So for him not to come home or even check in was completely out of character. Shortly after midnight, Jackie reported Kendrick missing to the police, and by the following morning, when he still hadn't returned home, she drove to the school. But instead of getting any clarity, she only grew more worried because Kendrick had missed 2 of his classes the previous day. Something else his family said was completely out of character for him. She would soon learn that her son never left campus the day before. Kendrick's high school had 2 gyms, a larger, newer gym and a smaller one known as the old gym. Inside the old gym, there were several large athletic mats stored in one corner. And earlier that morning, a few students were hanging out in there before class when they saw something sticking out of one of the mats. Before winter break, about half of them were rolled up and standing vertically, while the other half were rolled up but lying on the ground. But when all the students came back after the break, they were all standing up vertically, which made them about 6 feet tall. So when the students saw something sticking out of one of them, they climbed onto the nearby bleachers to get a better look and saw what appeared to be a white sock. At first, they assumed it was some kind of prank. Maybe another student had placed a sock over the opening to make it look like someone was trapped inside, the kind of joke you might expect from a group of teenagers. But when they moved closer and looked down into the center of the mat, they quickly realized this wasn't a prank. There was someone inside. The students then ran from the gym, found a teacher in the hallway, and told him they thought someone might be trapped inside one of the rolled mats. Understandably skeptical, the teacher followed them back into the gym, climbed onto the bleachers, and looked down through the opening at the center of the mat, where he saw more than just a pair of white socks. It was the body of a deceased student. When the police arrived, it didn't take them long to identify the person trapped inside the gym mat as 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson. And from that moment forward, there have been different opinions about how exactly he got there and why he died. Based on the official story from the police, on January 10th, Kendrick attended 2 morning classes and then arrived at the gym at 1:09 to get a pair of hidden sneakers. Although the school is covered in security cameras, none were pointed directly at the rolled-up gym mats. It wasn't uncommon for students to use the mats to store their belongings so they wouldn't have to pay for a locker. So that day, Kendrick had gone there to pick up a pair of shoes he and another student shared. They were usually left inside the mats, which were typically turned on their side. But as I mentioned a moment ago, over Christmas break, the mats had been turned vertically. Instead of tipping the mat over onto its side, as he had reportedly done before, investigators believe Kendrick climbed on top and reached down through the opening in the center to try and get the shoes, but got stuck. He then slipped farther inside and became wedged upside down, unable to push himself back out. And the Georgia Bureau of Investigation would later conclude that he died from positional asphyxia and classify his death as accidental. Positional asphyxia happens when a person's body becomes trapped in a position that prevents them from breathing. In Kendrick's case, investigators believed that narrow space in the gym mat restricted his movement and his ability to expand his chest, while the inverted position made it impossible for him to free himself. But Kendrick's family immediately questioned whether that was even physically possible. Kendrick was approximately 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighed around 160 pounds. His family has said his shoulders measured approximately 19 inches across, while the opening at the center of the rolled mat was reportedly only about 14 inches wide. So how could Kendrick's body, particularly his shoulders, have entered such a narrow opening in the first place? That question is just one of many that his family had after hearing the official claims of an accident. This next part is somewhat graphic. Investigators believed Kendrick remained upside down inside the mat for close to 21 hours, and during and after his death, gravity caused blood to collect in his head and face. So when first responders pulled him from the mat, there was fluid and blood that also poured out. But that's something else his family had questions about. 2 pairs of shoes were found near Kendrick's body. The first was the pair he had worn into the gym that day. Those were found rolled up in the mat with him, close to his knees, and not on his feet because he was only wearing socks when they found him. There is a photo of this that I'll post to the website and on social media, but you can also look it up for yourself. But the shoes are sort of neatly placed together behind his knees, and no one is quite sure how they got there. Some people might look at the photo and say someone deliberately placed them there after the fact. while others say Kendrick might have kicked them off while trying to get out of the mat. Both seem to be plausible theories, in my opinion. The second pair of shoes, the shared gym shoes investigators believed Kendrick had been trying to retrieve, was found on the floor beneath his head. But crime scene photographs appear to show the shoes sitting on top of a pool of blood without any drops of blood on top of them. So to Kendrick's family and supporters, that raised an obvious question. If blood flowed directly from his face, how did it end up beneath the shoes and not on top of them? To look at it from both sides, that detail doesn't necessarily mean something nefarious happened. Liquid can flow around an object already resting on the floor and seep beneath it without covering its upper surface. And when investigators studied the blood pattern, they concluded that it was consistent with their accident theory. When Kendrick was removed, one arm was extended above his head while the other remained down by his side, near his torso. This also supported the police's theory because he likely used one arm to reach down into the mat, while keeping the other near the top of the mat. But the shoes aren't the only controversial piece of evidence in this case. Inside the gym, investigators photographed a sweatshirt and a pair of orange and black athletic shoes on the gym floor. There was also a small amount of blood on one of the walls and some blood in the girls' bathroom. But all the police have said is that the blood doesn't belong to Kendrick. And the sweatshirt and shoes found near his body were never collected or tested. They were only photographed. Now, those might seem like insignificant details, but in a case like this, when a family believes they aren't getting the answers they deserve, these details matter. Beyond saying the blood didn't belong to Kendrick, no additional forensic testing was done as far as my research suggested. Then there was the school's surveillance footage. Kendrick's high school had a pretty extensive network of cameras, and in November 2013, approximately 290 hours of footage from 35 cameras covering the gym area were released following a court request. But like I mentioned earlier, none of the cameras showed the area where the gym mats were. And many of these cameras were motion activated, recorded at different frame rates, and operated through different servers, which later created apparent gaps and timestamp discrepancies that only fueled more speculation. Footage from January 10th showed Kendrick moving quickly through the old gym toward the area where the mats were located. A hallway camera also captured him shortly before he entered, while other students can be seen nearby. But no one appears to follow him into the gym. The footage establishes that Kendrick entered voluntarily and headed toward the mats shortly before he was last seen alive. But once he reached that corner, the cameras lost sight of him. When the footage was eventually released, those irregularities immediately raised suspicions that portions had been deleted or altered. CNN had even asked a forensic video analyst to examine some of the recordings, and he described aspects of the footage as suspicious. But subsequent reviews offered a less sinister explanation. The cameras operated on different servers, their clocks were not perfectly synchronized, and the motion-activated system naturally produced choppy recordings and periods with no footage. And during the federal investigation, the FBI reportedly reviewed video from approximately 62 cameras across the wider school campus and found no missing images attributable to tampering. They also tracked Kendrick and several students who had been publicly connected to the case. Still, no camera captured the one place that mattered most, the mats themselves. So the footage cannot tell us whether Kendrick climbed into the mat alone, whether anyone else was with him, or exactly how he became trapped. Let's now dive into the autopsies. But before we discuss the official one and the one Kendrick's family had done, there's something else worth mentioning. Kendrick's body was found inside the mat at around 10:30 in the morning, but the Lowndes County coroner Bill Watson wasn't notified of his death until 3:45 that afternoon. That's close to 5 hours later. I don't think I have to tell you just how big of a problem that can be when it comes to the forensic investigation. It's also against the law. Under Georgia state law, the sheriff's office is required to notify the coroner immediately upon finding a deceased person, so a formal declaration of death can be made. However, as we can see here, there was a massive delay. And by the time the coroner even got on scene, the gym mats had already been moved, Kendrick's body had been partially removed, and the scene had already been disturbed. Even Bill Watson himself seemed to criticize this mistake, saying in a report that the entire investigation into Kendrick's death had been compromised from the very beginning. To play devil's advocate, that doesn't mean a crime took place or that there was a cover-up. The teacher and students had moved the mat before anyone understood what they had found, and emergency personnel needed to confirm whether Kendrick could still be helped. But once authorities arrived, preserving the scene and getting the coroner involved should have been a top priority. Instead, the delay created a serious investigative weakness and gave Kendrick's family one more reason to distrust everything that followed. The first autopsy that was done was the official one by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, which ruled Kendrick's death an accident by positional asphyxia. But shortly after that, Kendrick's family contacted Reverend Floyd Rose, the president of the Valdosta Lowndes County chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. They didn't believe their son had died in an accident and wanted an independent autopsy done. And one of their earliest questions was painfully simple. If Kendrick became trapped while other students were nearby, why did no one hear him calling for help? So on May 8, 2013, a second autopsy was conducted on Kendrick by private pathologist Dr. William Anderson, and he concluded that Kendrick's death was not an accident, but had been caused by a blow to his neck based on hemorrhaging found on the right side of the neck. There weren't any fractures to his jaw, neck, or throat. There was just the mysterious bruising. Then it was discovered that all of Kendrick's organs were missing. His body cavity had instead been filled with newspaper by the funeral home. I know to some of you that detail might sound completely shocking. I know that's how I felt when I first read it. But while it's not considered best practice, stuffing a person's body with newspapers after an autopsy isn't illegal. And a state investigation later concluded that newspaper wasn't the most appropriate choice, but that the funeral home hadn't violated Georgia's regulations. The more complicated question was what happened to Kendrick's organs. The funeral home said it never received them. According to them, they were told the organs had been destroyed through the natural decomposition process and discarded before Kendrick's body was returned to Valdosta. Whatever the explanation, the chain of custody was poorly communicated, and the organs were unavailable for Anderson to examine at the second autopsy. Maybe it wouldn't have mattered, but without them, no one can say for sure. Internal organs can provide information about disease, toxicology, trauma, and the physiological process that led to death. And their absence didn't prove a cover-up, but it prevented the second pathologist from independently evaluating all of the state's findings. So now there were two autopsies and two fundamentally different explanations. One pathologist said Kendrick became trapped and suffocated. The other said he died from a blow to the neck. Race also became an unavoidable part of this case. Kendrick was a Black teenager in South Georgia, and his family believed their concerns were dismissed in a way they wouldn't have been if their son had been white, and their distrust didn't develop in a vacuum. The history of Black families receiving unequal treatment from law enforcement is real, and the mishandling of Kendrick's death scene only deepened that suspicion. Many social organizations ended up getting involved, and the case grew from a local death investigation into a national civil rights controversy. I think that's just one of many reasons this case is still talked about so much, even all of these years later. The Johnson family demanded that authorities reopen the case and consider the possibility that Kendrick had been murdered. When that didn't happen, the family and their supporters organized rallies and demonstrations. And in April 2013, several demonstrators, including members of Kendrick's family, blocked the entrance to the Lowndes County Courthouse. They were ultimately arrested for criminal trespass, and Reverend Rose helped post Jackie Johnson's bond. The message behind the protest was clear. Kendrick's family just didn't believe the official investigation had answered what happened to their son. Then the family released a photograph that transformed the public conversation around the case. The image showed Kendrick's face after his body had been recovered, autopsied, and transported to the funeral home. And in it, his face was severely swollen and discolored, and he looked almost unrecognizable. This is another image that is available online and has been shared by his family. So if you want to check it out for yourself, just know that it's a very graphic and disturbing image. But it shows you just how bad he looked when his body was finally turned over to his family. If you saw this photograph and didn't know anything about accidentally getting stuck in a gym mat, that's not what you'd think happened to him. In October 2013, U.S. Attorney Michael J. Moore announced a federal investigation into Kendrick's death. They reviewed the autopsy findings, school surveillance video, electronic records, and witness accounts. They also investigated the people publicly accused of harming Kendrick. Let's talk about those people now. Two brothers who went to high school with Kendrick, Brian and Brandon Bell, whose father worked as an FBI agent, another point Kendrick's family pointed toward involving a cover-up. The Johnson family filed a $100 million wrongful death lawsuit alleging that Brian Bell held a grudge against Kendrick. They claimed the two had been in an altercation on a school football bus a year prior, and rumored that Kendrick was involved with Brian's girlfriend. The lawsuit accused the Bell brothers of cornering Kendrick in the gym, beating him to death with a 45-pound weight, and stuffing his body into the gym mat. But there was never any evidence connecting either brother to Kendrick's death. The federal investigation didn't find any evidence. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation didn't find any evidence. Even a federal grand jury that was called to look into the case didn't find any evidence. In fact, all the evidence suggests that the Bell brothers were completely innocent. Brandon Bell, the older brother, wasn't even on campus that day. He was traveling on a school bus to an away wrestling tournament in another city at the exact time Kendrick entered the gym. And Brian Bell was documented on surveillance footage in a completely different part of the school, sitting in a classroom. The Johnsons later withdrew the lawsuit, and the brothers' attorneys then sought reimbursement for the substantial cost of defending themselves. In August 2017, a judge ordered the Johnsons and their attorney to pay approximately $292,000 in legal fees. The judge concluded that the claims against the defendants lacked evidentiary support and criticized the plaintiffs for advancing allegations without a factual basis. Then, after nearly 3 years of investigation, the Department of Justice announced that it would not file federal charges. Federal investigators said they had conducted dozens of interviews, reviewed hundreds of hours of surveillance footage, and analyzed electronic, physical, and forensic evidence. Ultimately, they found insufficient evidence to prove that anyone had violated Kendrick's civil rights or committed another federal crime. For Kendrick's family, however, the case was far from over. In June 2018, Kendrick's body was exhumed again. Dr. Anderson conducted another examination and later added trauma to the right side of Kendrick's chest to his findings. This was a wound they believe the brothers used the dumbbell to attack him with, but no weapon was ever recovered, and investigators never established that a dumbbell or any specific object struck Kendrick. However, this story is far from over. In March 2021, newly elected County Sheriff Ashley Polk reopened the local investigation after receiving the federal case files and a recording that was promoted as a possible confession. The recording was investigated, but authorities didn't find it credible. Polk then spent months reviewing approximately 17 boxes of material gathered by local, state, and federal agencies. And in January 2022, he released a 16-page report of that review. He found no evidence of foul play, no evidence of a conspiracy, and no evidence that Brian or Brandon Bell, or anyone else for that matter, had encountered Kendrick that day. Polk said he was completely convinced Kendrick's death had been a tragic accident. He also offered $500,000 of his own money for information leading to the arrest and conviction of anyone responsible, if credible evidence of a crime existed. In 2023, Kenneth and Jackie Johnson filed another federal lawsuit, this time seeking $1 billion and accusing the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the county sheriff's office, and others of withholding records and violating their civil rights. That case went on for months before a federal judge dismissed it in March 2026, citing several legal barriers, including sovereign immunity, improper service, and statutes of limitation. The dismissal wasn't a jury finding that every aspect of the original investigation had been handled correctly. It meant the family's claims couldn't move forward in that particular lawsuit. The Johnsons immediately continued their legal fight, filing a new civil rights complaint seeking $10 billion and naming the federal court and 2 judges as defendants.
You didn't start a business just to keep the lights on. You're here to sell more today than yesterday. You're here to win. Lucky for you, Shopify built the best converting checkout on the planet. Like the just one tapping, ridiculously fast acting, sky-high sales stacking, champion of checkouts. That's the good stuff right there. So if your business is in it to win it, win with Shopify. Start your free trial today at shopify.com/win.
Kendrick Johnson was 17 years old. He walked into his high school gym on an ordinary afternoon, apparently to retrieve a pair of shoes, and never walked back out. His family continues to fight for a different answer. Authorities continue to maintain that the evidence points to a tragic accident. And more than 13 years later, the disagreement over how Kendrick died remains as intense as ever. As always, I want to know what you think. Do you believe the forensic evidence supports accidental positional asphyxia? Or do the conflicting autopsies and problems with the original investigation leave you convinced that something else happened inside that gym? To share your thoughts on Kendrick Johnson's story, or to view some of the photos discussed in this episode, be sure to follow us on social media at Forensic Tales. And if you want to listen to new episodes early and ad-free, consider signing up for our Patreon at patreon.com/Forensic Tales. You can get early ad-free access to new episodes and monthly full-length bonus episodes for as little as $3 a month. Your support on Patreon directly helps to fund the show's production, research, and editing costs. And as an independent one-woman podcast, your support truly helps to keep this show going. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you'd like to support the show and help fund research, production, and editing, you can do so with a small monthly contribution on Patreon. Patreon supporters get early access to ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus content. You can learn more at patreon.com/Forensic Tales. And if you enjoy the show, leaving a positive rating or review really helps others discover it. For a full list of sources used in this episode, visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.